Good evening and welcome to the Kim B. Davis Show. I'm your host, Kim B. Davis, and this evening we have a special guest. We have Kristopher Banks. He is the Deputy Director for Digital Organizing for a Human Rights Campaign, and this evening we're going to talk human rights. Good evening, Kris. How are you? Thank you for being on the Kim B. Davis Show.
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm great, thank you. So, Kris, tell us first about your role. Tell us what human rights are and why it's important.
For sure. So my role is I'm a Deputy Director for Digital Organizing, which means a lot of organizations post-pandemic are looking at how to engage communities in the online space. And that looks different to every organization. So right now, what Human Rights Campaign is trying to do is make sure we can take our supporters and move them from online to offline, but then also find ways to engage online that are just as fulfilling. So I've served in similar roles on the Biden campaign and in different organizations in the past. And so now what we're trying to do is how do we build a narrative, create community in the digital space to engage people at all types of levels? Mm-hmm. So that's what we're trying to do, really taking the digital space and not using it as just a place where we put messages, but really want to build community and bring people in that way.
Excellent. So why are human rights important? When we hear that, it's a buzzword. And oftentimes, so I'm going to date myself, and I am a little bit older than you. And so I remember Tiananmen Square in China in 1989 with children facing off army tanks. And so often when we hear of human rights, we'll see imagery such as that. Or we will hear about when the Soviet Union disbanded in 1991. And so now people will say, well, the USSR isn't around. China is different. The world is different. Why are we still talking human rights?
Because people want we're still fighting for basic access to systems within the American government, but across the world. But I think where we are in society is that we're at a point where the basic right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness in this country is not equal and afforded to all people. And so that's one of the biggest things that we advocate for. Within Human Rights Campaign, we advocate specifically for LGBTQ plus Americans, but we are in a space where we are advocating because some of the most vulnerable communities exist in that community. So people still don't have access to housing, people still don't have access to food, basic needs. And if you fall into some of these categories and some of the queer categories, especially if you're Black and queer in some of these spaces, it is disproportionately harder for you to access those basic needs. So we're still fighting for human rights because people don't have the basic needs to get through on a day-to-day basis.
So when we talk about in America, and people will say, well, everyone has a right to be employed. Everyone has a right to housing because we have laws in place. Talk to us about the laws that we do have in place and how companies, entities, or organizations are able to get around those laws.
Yeah, for sure. We have laws that say, yes, people should not discriminate. But we also in several states, you can still be discriminated for being a queer person. You can still be discriminated for being gay in the workplace. You can still be, fired for that. There are still places that can refuse to rent to you if you identify as something other than the sex you're born. If you can't get access to documents, right? People transition and they become, different people. They don't have access to documents so that they can, achieve housing. So there are barriers. There are barriers to adoption. There are barriers to surrogacy. There are all types of barriers that exist now for people who, don't fit the cisgender white male space to access things, just basic access of, like you said, housing, education. People can be kicked out of school if they identify as trans because there are not laws on the books. And so one of the biggest things that we're fighting for now is the Equality Act at the federal level, because the Equality Act will be the first time that we enshrine those rights and take away those discriminations at the federal level, because we don't have a blanket protection. We don't have blanket protections for a lot of groups in, society right now. And the Equality Act will be one of those things that will make sure we codify anti-discrimination against all Americans in this country.
Okay, so I want to give you a situation and I want you to talk me through this. So there have been several instances throughout the country where we've had businesses such as bakers, and I've heard this story more often than not, where you will have a gay, lesbian, transgender couple come in, want to purchase something, or later the baker will find out and then decide not to bake that cake. What do you say to people who will say, well, it's the business's prerogative to decide whether or not they want to service that? How does that decision impact society overall, or does it?
I think a lot of people, don't understand that it's very similar to a business choosing not to serve Black people. It is like the parallel in the same way. Whereas people say we don't serve these types of people. You cannot discriminate against a person. If you choose it's the same thing. So if you believe in civil rights, in the civil rights movement, traditionally where people were fighting for a seat at the table inside diners and restaurants, this is the same thing. It is essentially 100% the same thing, in that businesses actively choosing to discriminate for people against something that is out of their control. People don't understand it. There are a lot of opinions out there on gender and sex or sexual orientation. But for most people that are queer and identify as queer, it is something that is them, and it's as inherently to them, who they are as the color of your skin. Mm-hmm. And I think we need to understand that when you say these things and you say, oh, a business has the right to do so, you're essentially saying a business also has the right to discriminate against Black people, Korean people, Asian people, Latinx people. You're saying the same thing in just a different way.
Thank you for that. So the midterms are coming up, and we've heard troubling legislation. So I'm going to start right with Florida, because Florida seems to be the bonanza for all types of things. They are actively banning books in Florida. They also have a campaign that says, and forgive me if I'm saying this incorrectly, I thought it said no promo for homo or something, basically saying that we're not going to talk about gay, lesbian, transgender issues. There's also been legislation that has been proposed that we won't discuss history because we don't want to make anyone uncomfortable. And if you are feeling uncomfortable, there has been a tip line established. Talk to us about how this is impacting midterms and why it's important for people to get out for midterm elections.
For sure. I think the Republican Party, let me not say Republican, I think conservative Americans have decided that they have their magic formula for the midterms. And their magic formula is show that the white middle class American is under attack, right? And they're under attack from a big coalition of people that includes African Americans, that includes other minorities, that includes gay people, that includes trans people, right? And so they're at this point where they are deciding to actively find issues where there are non-issues. In South Dakota, for example, there has been an anti-trans sports bill for youth, which is a solution to a problem that does not exist. In Florida, the Don't Say Gay bill is what they're calling it, no promo homo. But they want to essentially say to people that feel disenfranchised that yes, you are disenfranchised. And the reason why you're disenfranchised is because of these magical things like CRT and trans people. And if we, actively legislate them, to back to second-class citizenry, then you can thrive again. That's what's happening in a sense. It's a lot of people don't understand is that when critical race theory is not a thing, right? Mm-hmm. It's just history, right? It's just teaching things that happen. We don't want white kids. I saw some recently said we don't want white kids to feel bad by reading Michelle Obama's book. And I think a lot of times for me, you are defaulting to say that also you don't have any heroes in the story either, right? You're accepting that whiteness is inherently bad, when you start to do things like this, because you have heroes in the story. You have abolitionists, you have people that fought alongside the people who, minorities, disenfranchised people. So you could also use this opportunity to highlight that. I think if I were a white kid and I saw oh, there were good white people, maybe that will, make me want to be a good white person, whatever the case may be. But I think the conservative Americans have determined what they want to do. They've determined what this midterm is, and this midterm is a culture war for them. And I think on the, progressive and non-conservative side, I don't really know what the game plan is yet. And I think like, we're trying to figure out, navigate what that looks like. We don't want to be on defense, but like they've already taken offense by saying like race theory and like, the LGBTQ plus people are disenfranchising your community. You need to fight right now. So that's where we are.
And unfortunately, and you're correct. And right now we are a very divided nation. And there have been a few polls that have been done. And it was interesting because there was a poll that asked, do you feel that the United States is going in the right direction? And different minority groups all were concerned. The greater population of Caucasian people felt like everything is okay. We're getting back on track. Kris, talk about how we got here, because some people will say this started under the election of President Barack Obama, and that there was a slap back against that because people were afraid, because they felt as if, oh wait, does that mean that we're all on an even playing field and I'm not allowed? Just like we're having the conversation around affirmative action in colleges, bringing students on and saying that, well, because you're this particular nationality or this ethnicity, that you get preferential treatment, when actuality, that's not actually how it works. But can you talk about how we got here and some of the things that you're hearing from your campaign? And what you guys are doing to address it?
I think we got here a lot of ways. I will agree that like, I think President Obama and President Trump represent the United States in two very different ways, right? Two very different ideologies. I don't think President Trump represents a conservative America. I think President Trump represents the residual of what he saw in Obama to become a celebrity type president. And I think he monopolized on that. I don't think that he's a traditional conservative. I don't think any of those things about him. But what I do believe is that he saw that there's, celebrity power in being president, right? Mm-hmm. And so he was like, what can I take to keep my ratings up? And he realized that there is a segment of Americans that feel disenfranchised, that aren't actually disenfranchised. And so I think like what has happened is that like people don't understand that their success has come at the disadvantage of other people. So like you have had the ability to just be regular and basic for so long, right? For lack of better words, because other people have been stifled. Now that those people aren't stifled as much, you're seeing the playing field level, and to you, it feels like disenfranchised, right? So I think like that's how we get here. We get here by taking parts of our population and saying, you are a second-class citizen. You are a second-class citizen. But we don't think that you're a second-class citizen. That's what we say outwardly, but we know we're making you a second-class citizen. And then as you start to get towards the same playing field, now I feel disenfranchised because I can't be, for lack of better as organizations now. And so people feel like, oh, they're discriminating against us, when you don't realize that, like, no, we're catching up to 200 years of disenfranchisement. And we're still nowhere close to where we need to be, but no one is disenfranchising you.
You just said a mouthful, and I think you're right. Would you say that our democracy is in trouble?
Yeah, for sure, 100%. I think like, as someone who worked on the 2020 election and saw like our collective goal was to make sure that like we preserve democracy, I think like nothing else attributes to the success of that campaign than like there were so many Americans that were like, okay, democracy is at stake, right? And we're like, I need to be involved with this because democracy is at stake. Yeah, it's in peril. Like we are at a point where political contributions matter more than like what people say. We're at a point where like people are not held accountable. So we are in a real unique place right now as it relates to preserving our democracy. I think it is in peril. I think we can restore it, but it's going to take a lot of work. And I think there are people actively like working to demolish that. You got things like Q, where people believe completely crazy conspiracy theories. Yes. So like we're combating a lot right now, right? And I think if you ask people I'm on TikTok a lot. If you ask people that were from nations, African nations, European nations that have fallen, you'll see a lot of them talking about the similarities in case, right? And so I think it's really important for people to not just look at the situation in terms of like, I am an American, but look at it in terms of like, globally, now that you have access to all these other people, right, who have all these experiences, what are they saying about our situation that reminds them of their situation? So either A, we can avoid it, or B, we can see it coming and like not be shocked when it happens, right? So I think like we're at a very interesting point though, but like there are a lot of examples out there that we could be looking to make us better actors in this situation.
Excellent. What are people saying when you guys are on the ground in terms of pushing for human rights? What is the feeling? Is it positive? Is it negative? Is it in the middle?
I think a lot of people are at a point where people wish more people were engaged, right? Like, so like, I think you have people who are constantly always engaged. Those are the activists you talk to the most. But there are like also like activists that want a lot more people to be engaged in this work. And we're fighting every day to get more people engaged in this work. And it does sometimes feel like, what am I doing? You know, what can I do to advance the movement if they're not like, I don't know if these powerful people are going to keep doing what they do. Now, I've only been at this organization for a few weeks now. But I think like even just in progressive, like the progressive landscape from people I talk to, people I've worked with, it is like every time we take a step forward, there's going to be steps back, and like they keep trying to change the rules every time we change the rules. So I think people are energized and fired up and they're ready to like get something done. But every time we don't necessarily know what that is that needs to get done. Right. I think they like, there's constantly moving targets, and that's because we are often playing defense in a lot of places, right? In a lot of states, we're playing defense. We're not in control. We're not in charge. And because of that, they know that they can like take these random social issues like CRT, blow them up, get support, and then leave people hanging at every other part of their societal needs, right? But because those people feel good about this social thing that's passed, we're at a point now where like it's this very weird thing where, we're playing defense in a world where people have figured out that they don't actually have to do much for their constituents. They could just actively like put up these fake wars about these social issues, and their people will follow them to the end.
And we've seen that at school board meetings across the country where everybody is arguing about CRT, and critical race theory, better known as CRT, is taught at the collegiate level. It's not taught in elementary school, middle school, high school, any younger level. It is really for adults. Talk to me, Kris, because we are still in the pandemic. It's 2022. It's February. COVID is still going on. We have all types of variants going on. Is that impacting your campaign in terms of getting out and talking to people and people getting engaged? Because you have so much politically, and I'm saying that intentionally, that surrounds COVID, the politicization of COVID. Talk to us a little bit about that.
For sure. So I think like, we aren't in offices right now. We are still like, we're still like remote for a while. I think like some of the like traditional underground activism is slowly getting back to where it was. But I think like, yes, this impacts everybody's work, right? I've been behind a computer screen since 2020, doing work and trying to like figure things. I think like, depending on where you are, some states have gone back to normal. Some states are like operating as normal. So we're having actions, people are doing things. And then some states it's not okay, right? It's not okay to be active like that. So I think like it varies, but like that's when you have to get innovative and use things like digital tools to get folks engaged, to really like start to like figure out how we can take these tools we have and like maximize the ability to get people engaged.
And so speaking of digital tools, talk to us a little bit about how the digital world is impacting. And I've worked with you before, and so I know you talk about the power of social media, but a lot of times when people talk about digital organizing, they think, oh, I'm just going to put a post up on social media. Is it just putting a post up on social media, or is it a little bit more than that?
I think it's evolving, right? I think part of it is putting a post on social media. I think also a part of it is getting people to understand the power that they have
Mhm.
And I think like also it's about community building. So like, yes, we can still do our traditional things, phone calls, text messaging, sign up for this thing, sign this petition. But I think we're evolving to the point where like people want to feel a part of something, especially given the fact that like now in this pandemic, like people have been behind their computers for years, right? For years. And so like, I think we're at a point now where like you can build community with people and then also make people realize the power that they have. You, Kim, have an audience, like you have people that look to you for certain information about issues, whether it's like what's happening at the kid's school or what the case may be, right? You, as a validator, we're using digital now to empower you to talk to your communities about the issues that matter, right? So it's about like really developing leaders around the communities that they have and not so much like, hey, you do this thing for us, right? Hey, you like come to this event. It's much more like, how can we help you empower your community to be active in this work? So I think like digital has evolved to that. I don't know what just happened here. Oh my goodness. Digital has evolved to that where and okay. This is oh goodness. Yeah. So digital has evolved to that where it is this thing now where people are goodness 2020 where
Yes.
people are here we go, I'll sit here.
Okay.
Where people are navigating in new spaces, new ways to like really engage. And so I think like it is less about how it used to be where it's like, hey, we're a campaign, we'll put out a message, we want you to do this thing for our campaign. Now we're much more like, hey, you are a community leader, let's move you up a ladder of engagement, let's get you the tools necessary to get involved, and like let's get you talking to your people about this issue.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, Kris, we have a few more minutes. Tell us about what your greatest concern is in your role. What issue are you most concerned about?
I think right now, like one of the biggest things, make sure we pass the Equality Act. I think passing the Equality Act and voting rights are two of the biggest concerns right now in anybody's like purview. I think like anybody who is doing any work in the progressive space right now, one, the Equality Act, like just to preserve the morale of people who feel like they've been beaten up for a while or feel like all the progress they've made, especially in the queer community, all the progress we've made since Don't Ask, Don't Tell, right? Or like since marriage equality is like being reversed and chipped at like piece by piece by piece in states, right? And I think like, to be able to pass that legislation and really like enshrine that equality is important. But then I think also another thing that is like at stake is voting rights. If people don't have the right to vote, if people don't have access to the ballot box, if the ballot box is rigged, then like we don't have a democracy. And if like they're going to continue to actively like try to hinder people from getting access to the ballot box, we're in a really, really sad place. And so I think like those are the two things that matter the most to me right now in my work.
Excellent. And those are two very good pieces of legislation that do need to pass and that impact all of us as Americans. Kris, is there a way for people to get involved with this particular campaign or to learn more about it? How can we find you on social media? Tell us how we can reach you and then how we can learn more about your campaign.
For sure. So I'm at KD_Banks on all social media platforms. That's Twitter, that's Instagram, that's all of them. Feel free to follow me at any of those places. Kris Banks on social. And I usually link to my work there, but like if you wanted to follow the Human Rights Campaign, it's at HRC on Twitter and then humanrightscampaign.org.
Excellent. Thank you for being on the Kim B. Davis Show and giving us an update on what's happening with human rights and talking politics. We hope that you will join us on another episode and get us up to speed on where you are.
For sure. When I am not having technical difficulties.
We understand. We're still in the middle of a pandemic and it's 2022, so things happen. So again, thank you for being on. Thank you guys for tuning in to the Kim B. Davis Show. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok, everywhere on social media. And it's Kimberly Bachelor Davis. Bachelor is spelled BATCHELOR. You can see this show at youtube.com/Kimberly Bachelor Davis. You can hear this show on Apple, Spotify, Google, and Stitcher. And you can learn more about me as an author at kimbdavis.com. Thank you guys for tuning in. I hope to see you on our next episode. And as always, remember, be magnificent.